He signed our divorce papers with a mocking grin. But when the judge read my late father's will aloud, his smile shattered. Damien Holt signed our divorce papers with a smirk so sharp it cut deeper than any blade, his laughter echoing through the courtroom like a victory song. But when Judge Eleanor Kane broke the seal on an envelope scrawled in my father's unmistakable hand and began reading Richard Carrington's final words, that grin of Damien's shattered into silence. What my father left behind wasn't just an empire. It was a weapon. And in that instant I understood. Damien hadn't won. He had only awakened a war that would bring him to ruin. If you're enjoying this story, click subscribe, like this video, and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Now let's get back to the story. The air inside Savannah Superior Court was suffocating that August afternoon, thick with humidity and the sour tang of anticipation. Ceiling fans hummed lazily overhead, but nothing could cut the weight pressing down on the room. To Selene Carrington, seated at the plaintiff's table in a navy blue sleek suit, the courthouse felt less like a hall of justice and more like a stage where her humiliation would be performed for all to see. Her hands clenched together in her lap, knuckles whitening, nails leaving crescent moons in her skin. Across the aisle, Damien Holt leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, the picture of confidence. His navy suit was tailored within an inch of arrogance, his gold cufflinks catching every stray beam of sunlight like they were mocking her. He smirked at her, always smirking. "You know," he murmured, loud enough for her to hear but quiet enough to escape the judge's notice. "This isn't an ending, Selene. It's a coronation. My coronation." Selene didn't answer. Words with Damien had long since become weapons, and she wasn't giving him the satisfaction of drawing blood. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Eleanor Kane swept into the chamber, her black robe flowing behind her like the shadow of a storm cloud. She was a woman in her early 60s, her silver hair coiled tightly, her eyes sharp and calculating. Those eyes flicked to Selene for the briefest moment. Sympathy? No, something harder. A recognition that today would not end as anyone expected. The proceedings began with dull efficiency. Damien's attorney, a sleek man with hollow cheeks, read through the agreed-upon terms of division, property, accounts, the usual bones of a decayed marriage. Selene's father had died only weeks before, and grief still hung heavy in her chest, but Damien wore his grin like armor, as if Richard Carrington's passing had been just another business opportunity. Finally, the divorce papers were slid across the table. Damien picked up the pen, holding it between his fingers like a dagger. He didn't sign immediately. He waited until Selene's eyes met his. Then he lowered the nib, scrawled his signature with a flourish, and leaned back, releasing a low, triumphant chuckle that echoed in the hush of the courtroom. The sound sliced her open. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, not here, not in front of him. But a single tear escaped, tracing down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Let him think he'd won. Let him enjoy it. Judge Kane cleared her throat. Before this court finalizes the decree, there is one additional matter, pursuant to the last will and testament of the late Richard Carrington. The words shifted the air like the sudden drop before a storm. Damien's smirk faltered. Selene's breath caught. From a leather case, the judge withdrew a crisp envelope, Richard Carrington's bold handwriting sprawling across the front. Selene's chest ached at the sight of it. She remembered sitting in her father's study as a child, listening to the scratch of that same hand signing contracts that moved millions. That script had built an empire. Now it was about to dismantle one. Judge Kane unfolded the paper, her voice calm but resonant. "To my daughter, Selene," she read, I leave Carrington Enterprises, the estate, and all holdings therein. She is to inherit fully and without condition, save for this clause. If she remains married to Damien Holt, her inheritance is forfeit." Gasps rippled through the room. Damien's jaw twitched. His smug facade fractured. Judge Kane continued, her eyes narrowing. "To Damien Holt, I leave one item only. The Blackwater Ledger. Contained within are records of my dealings, my debts, and my enemies. Use it wisely or let it destroy you. My reasons are my own." The chamber froze. Damien's smirk returned. Not wide, not mocking. Darker. Calculated. A predator scenting blood. Selene's pulse thundered in her ears. She had the company, the estate, the empire. But Damien had been handed something far more dangerous than money. A weapon. And in that moment she understood. Her divorce wasn't the end of the war. It was the opening shot. The late summer sun burned hot against the marble steps of the courthouse, but Selene Carrington barely felt it. She stood rooted in place, clutching her leather handbag like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Reporters crowded at the base of the stairs, cameras flashing, their voices crashing together in a frenzy of questions. "Ms. Carrington, how do you feel about the inheritance? Was this a setup against your ex-husband? What's the Blackwater Ledger? Did you know about it?" The word cut through her like a knife every time it was shouted. Blackwater. Damien descended the steps a few paces behind her, flanked by his brother Victor and a pair of their associates. His grin gleamed as if the chaos had been choreographed for him. He didn't push through the reporters. He welcomed them, stopping to adjust his tie, to flash his teeth, to savor the spotlight. "Blackwater," he said smoothly to one microphone thrust his way, "is nothing more than a book of numbers. Richard Carrington was a man of complicated business tastes. He left it to me for a reason. Perhaps he trusted me more than his daughter." Laughter rippled through the gathered crowd. Selene's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream that Richard hadn't trusted Damien, that he had despised him. But she bit back the impulse. Damien thrived on spectacle. Feeding him outrage was handing him victory. She slipped through the swarm of reporters and into the waiting black sedan her driver had brought. As the door shut, muting the chaos outside, she finally exhaled. The ride to the Carrington estate was silent save for the hum of tires on asphalt. Her father's house loomed ahead, perched above the river like a fortress. It had always felt imposing. Today it felt haunted. Inside, Selene went straight to her father's study. His scent still lingered. Oak, tobacco, leather. The desk was bare now, his belongings boxed and tucked into storage. But on top of the polished wood, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with a wax insignia, lay the ledger. Her breath caught. The seal had already been broken. Damien had opened it. Selene's pulse quickened as she peeled away the wrapping. The book was bound in cracked black leather, heavier than it looked. She flipped the cover open. Her father's neat handwriting filled every page. Lines of dates, payments, names. Some were familiar. Judges, contractors, city council members. Others sent chills down her spine. Offshore companies, political campaigns, foreign investors. Every page was a confession. Every entry a weapon. And then she saw it. October 14th, 2022. $2 million. Holt and Associates. Her stomach lurched. That was the very month she had caught Damien cheating. The same month her father had refused to speak of certain business matters. Why would Richard pay Damien? Or had Damien paid Richard? No, her father's careful notation style was clear. Money had flowed to Damien. Selene closed the book, her hands trembling. The ledger wasn't just dangerous. It was poisonous. It tied her father to corruption, yes, but it also tied Damien to something deeper. Something she didn't yet understand. As she set the ledger down, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello." Damien's voice oozed through the line. Calm, confident, mocking. "I see you've opened it." Selene's blood ran cold. "You think that ledger makes you strong," he continued. "It doesn't. It makes you a target. Everyone named in there will come for you the moment they realize you have it. The difference between us, Selene, is that I know how to use it. And you—" He paused, letting the silence curl like smoke. "You'll drown in it." The line went dead. Selene lowered the phone slowly, her reflection staring back from the black glass of her father's desk. The ledger was supposed to be her shield. But in Damien's hands, or in hers, it might just be the blade that cut them both down. And somewhere in her chest, beneath the grief and fear, a spark of anger flared. He thought she would drown. He thought she would crumble. But Selene Carrington had spent her entire life underestimated by men like Damien. This time, she promised herself, would be different. Selene didn't sleep that night. The ledger lay open on her father's desk, its pages whispering secrets that clawed at her mind long after her eyes blurred with exhaustion. Bourbon burned in her throat, but it dulled nothing. Every entry she read was a doorway into corruption she hadn't wanted to believe possible. There were political donations, amounts that dwarfed legal limits, consulting fees to council members who had later approved rezoning requests, charitable contributions that funneled back to private accounts. Her father had built an empire, yes, but he had built it in shadows. Selene pressed her forehead into her palms, her breath shallow. Richard Carrington wasn't the hero Savannah remembered at ribbon cuttings and charity galas. He wasn't the man who told her bedtime stories about honor and legacy. He was the architect of a kingdom of rot. But the rot didn't end with him. Selene flipped to a section labeled only by years: 2021, 2022, 2023. Each page carried a litany of names. Some she recognized immediately. Judges, developers, the mayor himself. And then, again, Damien's name. October 12, 2022, $1,980,000. No notes. No explanations. Just the number. Selene traced the ink with her fingertip, her stomach tightening. $2 million. Paid to Damien at the exact moment her marriage had collapsed. The night she had walked into his office and found another woman seated on his lap. Her father had known. Her father had paid him. But why? Selene shoved the chair back, pacing the study, the bourbon glass trembling in her hand. The betrayal burned deeper than the liquor. Damien hadn't just betrayed her with infidelity. He had been tethered to Richard in ways she had never imagined. The sound of her phone buzzing jolted her. She grabbed it from the desk. A news alert. Breaking. Carrington Enterprises under federal investigation. The article unfolded in brutal clarity. Anonymous tips, offshore accounts, whispers of fraud and political bribery. Photographs of Selene at the courthouse plastered beside her father's smiling portrait, the caption framing her as the heiress of scandal. Her throat constricted. It was too sudden, too precise. Damien. He had moved faster than she imagined, leaking the ledger's existence, or parts of it, to the press, painting her as complicit. Selene dropped the phone onto the desk, her pulse pounding. Her father had given her the company, the estate, the wealth, but he had also given her a weapon too volatile to hold. And Damien, with that dark grin and that dangerous ledger, was already firing the first shots of a war she hadn't chosen. She sank back into her father's chair, staring at the ledger's cracked leather cover. Richard had left her everything. And maybe, just maybe, he had left her the means to destroy herself too. But Selene wasn't ready to break. Not yet. She pressed her palm flat against the ledger, whispering into the silence. "You wanted me to inherit this, Father? Then I'll use it. Not to drown, but to fight." Outside the tall windows of the Carrington estate, lightning forked across the Savannah sky. The storm had come, and Selene Carrington was ready to meet it. The storm that had rolled over Savannah the night before hadn't lifted. It lingered, heavy and electric, like the city itself was holding its breath. By morning, Selene's estate gates were choked with media vans. Reporters shouted her name through iron bars, their voices carrying across the lawn. Headlines already swarmed online. Carrington heiress linked to bribery ring. Ledger of lies. Selene Carrington inherits scandal. Damien Holt. I tried to protect her. That last one made Selene's blood boil. She read the article twice, fury rising with every word. Damien's face stared back from the screen. Handsome, contrite, calculated. His statement to the press had been timed perfectly. I loved Selene once. I still want the best for her. But the truth is bigger than either of us. Richard Carrington's dealings were unspeakable. I begged Selene not to cover for him, but she refuses to see reason. My only wish is that she can face the truth before it destroys her. Selene hurled the tablet across the room. It struck the fireplace with a sharp crack. Protect her. Damien wasn't protecting her. He was rewriting the story, painting her as the naive, grieving daughter who couldn't face her father's sins. And the city was eating it up. By the afternoon, protesters had joined the reporters outside the gates. Some held signs reading "Clean up Carrington corruption." Others chanted Damien's words back at her, "Truth before destruction." Selene stood at the tall window of her father's study, her reflection pale against the glass. The Blackwater Ledger sat on the desk behind her, its presence like a coiled serpent. She had two choices: hide and hope the storm passed, or fight back. Her phone buzzed. A call. The name made her pause. Robert Kane, Carrington Enterprises chief financial officer. A man her father had trusted implicitly. "Selene," he said when she answered, his voice tight, cautious. "I need to see you. Privately." Within the hour, he was standing in the study, his balding head gleaming with sweat, his glasses sliding down his nose. He looked at the ledger like it was a loaded gun. "You've opened it," he said flatly. Selene crossed her arms. "You knew about it." Robert's lips pressed into a line. Everyone in the inner circle knew. Richard kept it as leverage, every deal, every debt, every secret. The ledger wasn't protection, Selene. It was a noose. "Then why leave it to Damien?" she snapped. Robert hesitated, glancing toward the stormy window. "Because your father believed Damien would destroy himself with it. Richard thought he was too arrogant to wield it without it backfiring." Selene let out a bitter laugh. "Then my father underestimated him. Damien's using it against me already." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "He's dangerous, Selene. The names in that book. They're not just businessmen. They're power brokers, judges, politicians. If Damien exposes them selectively, He can turn the city against you before you even get your footing." As if to punctuate his words, Selene's phone lit up again, this time with a live news notification. She swiped it open, bile rising in her throat. Damien was standing outside Carrington Enterprises headquarters, cameras flashing, his voice smooth and practiced. Richard Carrington's empire was built on lies, he declared. And now his daughter holds the very book of those lies, the Blackwater Ledger. Instead of turning it over to the proper authorities, she clings to it, desperate to protect her own power. Savannah deserves better. Reporters clamored. Damien held up a hand, the picture of composure. "I call on Ms. Carrington to surrender the ledger to federal investigators immediately. If she refuses, then she proves she values her family's corruption more than this city's future." The crowd erupted with applause. Selene's grip on the phone trembled. Robert placed a hand on her shoulder, but it felt hollow, perfunctory. Damien had declared war in broad daylight. Selene turned back to the ledger, its cracked leather cover glowing faintly in the lamplight. She no longer had the luxury of waiting. If Damien wanted to fight with shadows and whispers, then she would drag him into the light. She squared her shoulders, her voice low but steady. "Fine. If he wants a war." She touched the ledger with her fingertips, feeling the weight of it. "Then I'll give him one." Savannah's police precinct smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you'd left. The walls were yellowed with age, lined with bulletin boards cluttered with mugshots, case notes, and the endless paper trail of a city drowning in its own secrets. Selene Carrington felt every eye on her as she walked down the corridor. Her heels clicked against the scuffed tile, her black dress stark against the chaos of the precinct. She knew the looks, whispers behind hands, the subtle narrowing of eyes. To them, she wasn't just Richard Carrington's daughter. She was the heiress of scandal, dragging her father's legacy behind her like a corpse. She found the office she was looking for. The glass pane read Detective Marisol Vega. Selene knocked once and pushed the door open. Marisol looked up from a desk buried under files and half-drained coffee cups. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun and eyes so sharp they seemed to cut through pretense before it could form. She didn't stand when Selene entered, didn't even soften her expression. "Well, well," she said, leaning back in her chair. "If it isn't Savannah's fallen princess." Selene stiffened but closed the door behind her. "I'm not here for cheap shots, detective." Marisol smirked, folding her arms. "Good. Because I don't have time for them. Why are you here, Ms. Carrington? Hoping the police will clean up Daddy's mess." Selene set the ledger on the desk between them. Its weight hit the wood with a heavy thud. Marisol's smirk faltered. Her gaze dropped to the black leather, and for the first time Selene saw something that wasn't disdain in her eyes. Wariness. "You've heard of it," Selene said softly. Marisol tapped her pen against the desk. "Everyone in law enforcement has heard whispers. A ghost. A rumor. They called it Blackwater. Nobody's ever been able to prove it exists." Selene flipped the ledger open, revealing pages of careful script. "It exists. And Damien Holt has it. Or most of it. My father left me this piece." Marisol leaned forward, scanning the entries. The names. The dates. The numbers. Her jaw tightened. "Jesus," she muttered. "This isn't just bribery. These are payoffs to judges. Offshore accounts tied to contractors. And—" She stopped, her pen hovering above one line. "Foreign transfers? To who?" Selene swallowed. I don't know. That's why I came here. Damien's already leaking parts of it to destroy me. But there's something bigger in here. Something called Project Blackwater. Have you heard of it? Marisol's eyes narrowed. She set her pen down slowly. Blackwater isn't a project. At least, not only a project. It's a network. A machine built to destabilize and profit. Land deals, political purges, money laundering. Some of us have been chasing threads for years, but they always slipped through our fingers. Selene felt the chill coil in her stomach. And now Damien controls it. Marisol gave her a long, piercing look. If that man has the full ledger, he doesn't just control it. He is it. And if he decides to pull the trigger... She shook her head. This city will bleed. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Selene stared down at the ledger, her father's neat handwriting suddenly looking like the scrawl of a man who had built a monster he couldn't contain. Marisol broke the silence. Why come to me? You could have gone to the feds. Because Damien's already poisoning the well, Selene said bitterly. He's framing me in the press, turning the city against me. I need someone local. Someone who isn't in his pocket. Marisol arched a brow. And you think that's me? I think you care more about the truth than who's signing your checks, Selene said evenly. For a moment, Marisol studied her. The room filled with nothing but the hum of a dying fluorescent bulb overhead. Then, slowly, the detective leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. All right, Selene Carrington. I'll bite. But understand this. Once we start pulling at these threads, there's no going back. Men like Damien Holt don't just fight to win. They fight to kill. Selene met her gaze without flinching. Then let him try. Marisol's smirk returned. Not mocking this time, but edged with respect. Good, she said. Because you just declared war on the most dangerous man in Savannah. And war leaves scars. Selene closed the ledger, her hand firm on its cover. Then let's make sure he's the one bleeding. Savannah woke to Damien Holt's voice. Every television, every radio, every newsfeed carried his perfectly rehearsed statement. He stood on the steps of City Hall, bathed in sunlight like a conquering hero, his navy suit sharp, his tone grave but steady. Richard Carrington, he began, was a man of influence. He shaped Savannah. But what he left behind was corruption, lies, a legacy of shadows. Selene watched from the living room of the Carrington estate, the curtains half drawn to block out the swarm of reporters beyond the gates. Her stomach knotted tighter with every word. Damien continued, his voice calm and sympathetic, crafted to sound like truth. I loved Selene once. I still wish her well. But she is blinded by loyalty to her father's name. Instead of cooperating with investigators, she hides the Blackwater Ledger. She hoards it, protects it, while this city suffers. The crowd of reporters erupted with shouted questions. Damien raised a hand, his expression solemn. I have nothing to hide. That's why I've made my copy of the ledger available to federal authorities. If Selene wishes to prove her innocence, she should do the same. Otherwise, Savannah must decide what kind of future it wants, one of lies or one of truth. The screen cut back to anchors debating his bravery, while headlines scrolled across the bottom. Damien Holt, truth over power. Carrington heiress cornered. Selene's hands shook as she muted the television. He's painting me as the villain, she whispered. Detective Marisol Vega stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He's not just painting you as the villain. He's painting himself as the savior. And the city's swallowing it whole. Robert Kane, summoned in haste that morning, paced the room like a man on the edge of a breakdown. If the public turns, Carrington Enterprises is finished. Our contracts, our investors, gone. Selene rounded on him. Do you think I don't know that? He's playing with fire, Robert. If I hand over the ledger, I burn my father's name. If I keep it, Damien crucifies me in the press. Marisol's voice cut through the room like a blade. Then you take control of the story. Selene blinked at her. You mean? Go public, Marisol said. Get ahead of him. Admit what Richard did. Admit the ledger exists. But make it clear Damien's twisting it for power. People can forgive the truth, Selene. They won't forgive silence. Robert sputtered. You want her to destroy her father's reputation on live television? Marisol shrugged. Richard Carrington already destroyed it. The only question is, who tells the story first? Damien or Selene? Selene walked to the window, staring out at the flashing lights of the cameras, the chanting protesters. Her reflection glared back at her in the glass. Her whole life, her father had drilled one lesson into her. Never show weakness. But Richard was gone. His rules, his empire, his secrets, they were chains she no longer wanted. Maybe Marisol was right. Maybe the only way to win was to burn the past before Damien could weaponize it. She turned back to them, her voice steady. Fine. If Damien wants a performance, I'll give him one. Robert looked horrified. Selene. But Selene's eyes were steel. Set it up. A press conference. Tomorrow. The next day, under the white glare of noon, Selene stood on the same courthouse steps where Damien had smirked his way through their divorce. Reporters swarmed, cameras blinding, microphones thrust forward like spears. She took a breath. The world hushed. My name is Selene Carrington, she began, her voice carrying over the crowd. Daughter of Richard Carrington. Heiress to a legacy this city once admired. And I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a truth-teller. Gasps rippled. Flashes stuttered like lightning. For decades, Selene continued, my father conducted business in shadows. He bribed, he paid off, he cut corners. He wasn't the man many of you believed him to be. I loved him, but I won't lie for him. A murmur spread through the crowd. The ledger exists, Selene said firmly. It holds proof of corruption in this city. But it is not a tool for justice in Damien Holt's hands. It is a weapon. And he is already using it to manipulate the truth, to frame me, to seize power for himself. I will not let him decide this city's future. I am cooperating with investigators. And I call on every honest leader left in Savannah to stand with me. Her voice rose above the din. This isn't about the Carrington name anymore. It's about whether Savannah belongs to truth or to Blackwater. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then, scattered applause broke out. Some shouted support. Others jeered. But one thing was clear. Selene had taken the story out of Damien's hands. And as she stepped down from the podium, cameras still flashing, she allowed herself one fleeting thought. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. The Carrington estate was quiet that night, unnaturally quiet. Reporters had finally retreated from the gates, their hunger sated, for now, by Selene's press conference. But the silence inside the house felt like the eye of a storm, waiting to break. Selene sat at her father's desk, the ledger open in front of her, a half-drained glass of bourbon beside it. Detective Marisol Vega leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her sharp gaze never straying far from the black book. Robert Kane hovered near the window, chain-smoking as if nicotine might somehow keep the truth at bay. Selene flipped another brittle page, her eyes scanning neat lines of her father's script. Offshore accounts. Transfers. Names. Always names. Then her hand froze. A torn page lay tucked into the back of the ledger, nearly hidden in the spine. The edges were ragged, as if ripped in haste. She pulled it free. Unlike the others, this one wasn't dense with notes. It was a list, short, precise. 4 names. A series of staggering amounts. And at the top, underlined twice, a single phrase. Phase 2. January 2025. Selene's chest tightened. Marisol pushed off the wall, stepping closer. What is it? Selene handed her the page, her fingers trembling. Marisol scanned it, her jaw tightening with every line. Jesus! These aren't just businessmen. Thomas Crow, he's a developer out of Miami. Hector Ruiz, he's tied to offshore banking in Panama. And, she tapped the last name, Senator Aldridge. That's federal. Robert paled. This isn't local bribery. This is national. Selene whispered the words at the top of the page. Phase 2. January 2025. That's 4 months from now. Marisol set the paper down carefully, as if it might ignite the desk. Blackwater isn't just history, Selene. It's a countdown. Robert swore under his breath. If this gets out, Marisol cut him off. If Damien has the rest of the ledger, he already knows. And if he's in bed with these names, then Phase 2 isn't just corruption. It's an operation. Something planned. Something big. Selene gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles whitened. Her father's ghost loomed heavy in the room, every page of his handwriting a reminder of what he'd built and what he'd unleashed. What does Phase 2 mean? She asked. What happens in January? No one answered. The question hung like thunder. Finally, Marisol said, whatever it is, Damien will use it. That man doesn't sit on weapons. He fires them. And if Phase 2 is what it looks like... She trailed off, her eyes dark. Then Savannah isn't just in danger. The whole state is. Selene stared down at the torn page, her heart pounding. For weeks she had thought the battle was about her inheritance, her father's name, her survival. But as she traced the words Phase 2, January 2025, she realized the truth. This wasn't about her at all. It was about the city, the power, the future. And Damien Holt wasn't planning to win Savannah. He was planning to burn it. Rain slicked the cobblestones outside the Carrington estate as Selene opened the heavy oak door. A young woman stood there, trembling beneath a cheap plastic poncho, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder. She clutched a folder so tightly that her knuckles had gone bone white. "My name is Lauren," she whispered. I used to work for Damien." Selene hesitated, then pulled her inside. "Come with me." In the study, Lauren peeled off the poncho, drops of rain spattering the carpet. She looked barely 30, with mousy hair pulled into a messy knot and dark circles under her eyes. She placed the folder on the desk like it was a bomb about to go off. "I handled some of his accounts," she said, her voice shaking. "Transfers. Paperwork. Offshore companies. At first, I didn't ask questions. But after a while, I knew something was wrong. When I confronted him, He said if I ever talked, he'd ruin me. Selene pushed the folder toward herself. And what's in here? Lauren swallowed hard. Proof. Inside were pages of bank records, wire transfers, and shell company filings. Money funneled from Carrington Enterprises through a maze of accounts, disappearing into the Caymans, Belize, Panama. One name was circled in red again and again. Crow Holdings, LLC. Selene's pulse quickened. Thomas Crow, the Miami developer on the torn Blackwater page. This ties him directly to Phase 2, Selene breathed. Lauren nodded frantically. He used me to push the transfers through. I know the system. I can testify. But if he finds out I came here. Marisol Vega, who had been listening quietly from the corner, stepped forward. Her voice was firm, steady. Then we'll protect you. But Lauren, you need to understand. If you testify, you'll be painting a target on your back. Holt doesn't bluff. Lauren's hand shook. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't keep living like this. Watching him destroy people. Destroy her. She nodded at Selene. He thinks he's untouchable. I want to prove he's not. Selene placed her hand gently over Lauren's. You're not alone anymore. We'll make this count. For the first time in weeks, Selene felt a flicker of hope. Damien could manipulate the press, poison the public, even twist the courts, but numbers didn't lie. Bank records didn't lie. With Lauren's testimony, they finally had something solid. Something that could cut through Damien's fog of charm and deceit. But hope, Selene was learning, was fragile. 2 days later, Lauren was gone. She was supposed to meet Marisol at the precinct. She never arrived. Calls went unanswered. Her apartment door was splintered. Her belongings strewn across the floor. On the kitchen counter lay her shattered phone. Selene's blood turned to ice when Marisol called with the news. She's gone, Marisol said flatly. And it wasn't random. This was professional. Selene sank into the leather chair of her father's study, her fingers trembling around the phone. Damien. As if summoned, the estate line rang. The butler transferred the call. Selene pressed it to her ear. His voice slid through the line, smooth, venomous. You should have warned her, Selene. Not everyone is built for war. Selene's chest heaved. Where is she? He chuckled softly. Alive. For now. But you have something I want. That little scrap of paper your father left you. The one marked Phase 2. Selene's grip tightened. No. Then Lauren dies. Silence. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Tick-tock, Damien whispered, and the line went dead. Selene lowered the phone slowly, her hand shaking, her throat raw. The torn page lay on the desk before her, its words burning like fire. Phase 2. January 2025. She stared at it, bile rising in her throat. Damien had the ledger, the press, the city. Now he had Lauren. And Selene was left with only one choice. Give him the page, or find another way to fight before the clock ran out. The warehouse stood on the riverfront, hulking and half abandoned, its rusted corrugated walls groaning in the midnight wind. The smell of salt water and oil hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint echo of waves slapping against the docks. Selene stood in the shadows across the street, her pulse racing. She wore dark clothes, her hair tied back, the torn Phase 2 page folded neatly inside her jacket. She wasn't here to surrender it. She was here to bait Damien into the open. Behind her, unmarked black SUVs idled quietly. Federal agents crouched inside, radios crackling with restrained energy. Marisol Vega adjusted the earpiece at her collar, her jaw tight. "You're sure about this?" Marisol asked. Selene nodded. "If I don't go, Lauren's dead. If I give him the page, this city's dead. We end it here." Marisol gave her a long look. "Just remember, men like Damien don't walk into traps. They walk into stages." Inside the warehouse, the air was colder, laced with mildew. Dim light bulbs swung overhead, casting erratic shadows across the cavernous floor. Damien was waiting. He stood in the center of the room, flanked by two of his men, his hands tucked casually in his coat pockets. He smiled when Selene stepped into the light. "Selene," he drawled, his voice echoing. "Always so dramatic. Showing up alone in the dead of night. Very cinematic." Her eyes flicked past him. In the corner, tied to a chair, bruised but alive, Lauren. A gag silenced her frantic cries. Relief surged through Selene's chest, tempered instantly by fury. "You wanted the page," Selene said, her voice hard. "I came to give it to you." Damien's grin widened. "Of course you did." She reached into her jacket slowly, pulling out the folded slip of paper. Damien's eyes glittered as she held it aloft. But before he could move, a sharp command rang out. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" Floodlights blazed on from the corners of the warehouse. Red laser sights cut through the dark. Dozens of agents poured in, rifles raised. Damien's men tensed, weapons half drawn. But Damien himself laughed. "Oh, Selene," he said, shaking his head. "You've learned nothing. You think I didn't know." He whistled sharply. The back doors of the warehouse burst open. More armed men stormed in, mercenaries, their faces masked, rifles gleaming. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the steel cavern. Bullets pinged off beams, shattering lights, sending sparks raining down. Selene dove behind a crate as agents and mercenaries clashed. Marisol returned fire from the entrance, shouting commands. Through the chaos, Selene saw Damien striding toward her, unbothered by the storm of bullets, his grin shark-like. "You're predictable, Selene," he called. "You inherited your father's empire, but not his instincts. He would have slit my throat in the dark. You, on the other hand," he ducked behind a beam as shots ricocheted past, "still believe in rules." Selene's blood pounded. She spotted Lauren still tied to the chair, her eyes wide with terror. With the firefight raging, Selene sprinted across the floor, ducking low, bullets whizzing overhead. She reached Lauren, ripping the gag free. "Hold on," Selene hissed, fumbling at the ropes. But Damien was already moving. He snatched the page from where Selene had dropped it, tucking it into his coat with a triumphant smirk. "Thank you, darling," he called before firing a shot into the ceiling. The sound cracked like thunder. In the confusion, smoke grenades hissed, filling the warehouse with choking plumes. Red lasers danced wildly as agents coughed and stumbled. When the air cleared minutes later, Damien was gone. So was the page. Selene knelt beside Lauren, finally freeing her from the ropes, her hands trembling. Marisol approached, fury etched across her face. "He played us." Selene's chest heaved as she stared at the empty doorway, Damien's laughter still echoing in her ears. He had the ledger. He had the page. And now he had the countdown. The following morning, Savannah looked deceptively calm. The river sparkled under the sun, tourists strolled along the waterfront, and the city's iron balconies bloomed with flowers. But Selene Carrington knew better. Inside the Carrington estate, the study was littered with papers, maps, bank statements, photocopies of the ledger's pages. Detective Marisol Vega had taken over the room like it was a war bunker, her corkboard strung with red thread that crisscrossed between names and dates. Robert Kane sat slumped in a chair, his tie loose, sweat beading his forehead. Lauren, pale and bruised but alive, hovered near the fireplace, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes darted constantly, haunted by the memory of ropes biting into her wrists. Selene stood at the desk, staring down at the ledger. But it wasn't the book that made her heart thunder. It was the words on the torn page Damien had stolen. Phase 2, January 2025. They had to know what it meant. Marisol jabbed at the corkboard with her pen. Crow Holdings, Ruiz Banking, Senator Aldridge, all tied together through Blackwater. But the numbers don't add up. These transfers aren't just bribes. They're investments. Selene frowned. Investments in what? Robert spoke up, his voice weak. Infrastructure, utilities, power grids, shipping contracts. Over the last 6 months, Damien's shell companies have been quietly buying up stakes in Savannah's backbone industries. At first I thought it was coincidence, but... He trailed off, wringing his hands. Marisol finished the thought grimly. It's not coincidence. It's consolidation. He's positioning himself to control the city from the inside out. Selene shook her head. No, it's more than that. My father wouldn't have called it Phase 2 if it was just business. Lauren's voice trembled. He called it something else. I heard Damien on the phone once, when I worked for him. He said, "When the purge begins, Savannah will crawl to me on its knees." The word struck the room like a gunshot. Purge. Marisol's eyes darkened. Not just control. Collapse. He's planning to crash the system. Power, shipping, finance. Cripple the city in chaos, then rebuild it under his rule. Selene's chest tightened. How? Robert pulled trembling hands over his face. He doesn't need bombs or soldiers. He has money. With the right moves, he can trigger a financial implosion. A run on utilities. A shipping strike. A blackout. If Savannah goes dark, if panic spreads, property values plummet, businesses fold, the city government collapses. Marisol finished for him. And Damien swoops in with his holdings, his partners, his ledger of leverage. He buys Savannah for pennies on the dollar. He doesn't just want to own this city. He wants to remake it. Silence choked the room. Selene's hands trembled as she closed the ledger. She could almost hear her father's voice, cold and pragmatic. Control is never given, Selene. It's taken when the world is too weak to resist. Damien hadn't just inherited that lesson. He was about to weaponize it. She whispered the words like a curse. January 2025. That's when he strikes. Marisol's gaze locked on hers. Then we've got 3 months to stop him. Selene lifted her eyes to the storm-dark window. 3 months. 3 months until Damien Holt turned Savannah into ashes. Savannah City Hall was a monument of marble and stained glass, its gilded dome gleaming in the winter sun. But inside, beneath the rotunda's painted ceiling, tension simmered like a fuse waiting to be lit. The city council chamber was packed. Reporters crammed into the gallery, their cameras buzzing. Business leaders filled the rows, their whispers sharp and anxious. At the dais, the council members shuffled papers nervously, as though they sensed they were about to sign something far larger than legislation. Selene Carrington stood near the back, flanked by Detective Marisol Vega and Lauren, who still bore fading bruises from her captivity. Robert Kane lingered at her other side, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. The air shifted when Damien Holt entered. He strode down the aisle like a king claiming his throne, trailed by aides in dark suits. In his hand he carried the ledger, its black cover gleaming like a weapon unsheathed. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Damien mounted the steps to the council dais, pausing to let the silence deepen. Then he placed the ledger on the table before him and rested a hand on it like a priest on scripture. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich, commanding, "Savannah stands at the edge of ruin. For decades, this city has been poisoned by corruption. You've all felt it, every deal, every contract, tainted by Richard Carrington and his cronies." Selene's chest tightened, fury burning hot in her veins. Damien opened the ledger, pages fluttering like wings. "Here is proof. Blackwater. A record of every lie, every bribe, every betrayal that shackled the city. And who holds it now? His daughter, Selene Carrington. A woman who would rather bury the truth than free you from it." Shouts erupted. Some council members demanded order, others leaned forward eagerly. The crowd fed on his words like kindling catching flame. Damien slammed the ledger shut, the sound cracking like thunder. "But I offer you a way out. A new beginning. Approve my proposal for the Savannah Renewal Project. Rezoning, utility restructuring, full privatization of failing sectors. Give me the power to rebuild, and I will burn away Carrington's rot once and for all." The chamber exploded with noise. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed. The council chair pounded her gavel for silence. Selene surged forward, her voice rising above the chaos. "Don't listen to him." Heads turned. Cameras swung toward her. She stepped into the aisle, her pulse pounding, her voice fierce. "That man isn't here to save Savannah. He's here to destroy it. He calls it renewal, but he's planning collapse. He'll gut your utilities, crash your economy, bleed this city until it begs him for mercy." Damien smirked, his voice a dagger of mockery. "Careful, Selene. You sound paranoid. Hysterical even. Just like your father, clutching secrets, seeing enemies in every shadow." Selene pulled a folded slip of paper from her coat, the torn page she had copied before Damien stole the original. She raised it high. "This is his plan," she shouted. "Phase 2. January 2025. A purge. A manufactured collapse. My father left this as a warning, not a gift. Damien Holt doesn't want to save Savannah. He wants to own it." Gasps surged through the chamber. Reporters shouted over one another. Microphones thrust forward. Damien's mask of composure cracked, just for a moment. His jaw tightened, his hand twitching on the ledger. Then the doors at the back burst open. Federal agents poured in, weapons drawn. "Everyone stay where you are." The room froze. Council members ducked. Reporters screamed. Selene turned to see Marisol leading the charge, her badge flashing. "Damien Holt, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and kidnapping." Damien's smirk returned, sharper, venomous. He snapped the ledger shut and tucked it under his arm. "You think this ends with me?" he called, his voice ringing across the chamber. "Blackwater doesn't die with an arrest. It's bigger than Carrington. Bigger than Holt. You can't stop the tide." Agents closed in, but Damien bolted, shoving past stunned council members and disappearing through a side exit. Shouts rang out as agents chased after him. Selene stood frozen in the aisle, the torn page trembling in her hand, her chest heaving. For the first time, the city had seen Damien's mask slip. But he was still out there. And the countdown to January hadn't stopped. Rain sheeted down over Savannah streets, the storm breaking with violent fury as sirens wailed through the night. Selene Carrington sprinted across the slick cobblestones outside City Hall, her breath tearing in her chest. Federal agents fanned out through the square, their shouts drowned by the roar of the storm. Somewhere ahead, Damien Holt was running. The city's gilded dome glowed faintly through the rain, its reflection shattered in puddles that rippled with every pounding step. Lightning forked above, casting the world in stark flashes of white. Selene rounded a corner and saw him. Damien, his navy suit clinging to his frame, his hair plastered to his forehead. He clutched the ledger under his arm like it was life itself, his grin twisted, defiant even as he fled. Damien. Selene's voice tore through the storm. He stopped at the edge of the square, chest heaving, rain dripping from his chin. Slowly, he turned to face her, his eyes wild, lit with something feral. "Selene," he called back, his voice ragged but mocking. "You should be thanking me. Your father built a prison. I'm offering this city freedom." She stepped closer, her hair whipping in the wind. "Freedom? You call collapse freedom? You call burning this city down salvation?" His grin widened. "Yes, because when it all crumbles, they'll look to me to rebuild it. I'll be the savior, the king this city always needed." Selene's stomach twisted. He believed it. He truly believed it. The agents closed in, weapons raised, but Damien didn't flinch. He raised the ledger high, shouting over the thunder. "You can't stop Blackwater. It's in every deal, every account, every name. I am Blackwater." Selene's eyes locked on his. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to hold still. "No," she said quietly, her voice steady as steel. "You're just a man. And men fall." The agents surged forward. Damien spun, darting toward the riverfront, his shoes splashing through ankle-deep water. Selene chased him, her lungs burning, the storm howling around them. At the edge of the wharf, Damien skidded to a stop. The river churned below, black and furious, waves slamming against the pilings. He turned, trapped between Selene, the agents, and the storm. For the first time, his smirk faltered. "Damien Holt," an agent shouted. "Drop the ledger and surrender." His eyes flicked to Selene, desperate, searching for some trace of weakness. "We could have ruled together," he spat. "You and me. You were too blind to see it." Selene's gaze was unflinching. "No. I finally see you for what you are." Damien let out a roar, raising the ledger as if he meant to hurl it into the river. But before he could, agents tackled him from behind, driving him to the slick boards. He fought like a cornered animal, kicking, snarling, his voice breaking. "This city was mine," he screamed as cuffs clamped around his wrists. "Mine. You can't take it from me. I am Blackwater. I am Savannah." The agents dragged him to his feet. Rain plastered his hair to his face, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with hate. Selene stepped forward, her heart pounding, her voice low but cutting. "No, Damien. Savannah was never yours. And Blackwater dies tonight." The agents hauled him away, his screams echoing through the storm. Selene stood at the edge of the wharf, rain soaking her to the bone, the ledger clutched tightly in her hands. The storm raged, the river boiled, but for the first time in months, she felt the chains loosening from her shoulders. Damien Holt had fallen, but the scars of Blackwater would remain. The storm had passed, leaving Savannah washed clean. The air was sharp with the scent of rain, the streets glistening under the glow of gas lamps. Inside Carrington Enterprises headquarters, silence reigned. The boardroom, once a place of power plays and whispered deals, was empty except for Selene Carrington. She stood at the head of the long mahogany table, the ledger lying open before her. Every page was a wound. Every name, every number, every signature, a scar her father had left behind. Robert Kane entered quietly, his hands clasped before him. The feds are combing through the ledger now. Once they're finished, Carrington Enterprises will survive, but it won't look the same. Selene nodded, her eyes still fixed on the book. Good. It shouldn't. He hesitated. Selene, your father built this empire. He meant for you to inherit it. She closed the ledger gently, her voice calm. I did inherit it. The wealth, the power, and the rot. But I won't carry on his empire of shadows. If Carrington Enterprises has a future, it will be in the light. Robert gave her a long look, then bowed his head. For the first time, Selene felt he wasn't seeing her as Richard's daughter, but as the leader in her own right. Later, in her father's study, she framed the torn copy of the Phase 2 page. Not as a warning, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. The reminder that survival was not enough. She had chosen to fight, and she had won. When she left the study, she didn't lock the ledger away. She handed it to Marisol Vega, who stood waiting at the door. Burn it, Selene said softly. Marisol arched a brow. Are you sure? This is the most dangerous evidence in Savannah. That's why it shouldn't exist anymore, Selene replied. Let the feds have their scans. But the original, it dies here. With my father. With Damien. Marisol studied her, then nodded. All right. We'll see it's done. As the detective carried the black book out into the night, Selene felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The Carrington Empire was no longer a prison. It was hers to remake. 3 months later, the Savannah River glimmered under the spring sun, its surface calm, as though it had never known storms. Selene walked the riverfront alone, the wind tugging at her hair, the cries of gulls carrying over the water. The city behind her buzzed with renewal. Businesses reopening, infrastructure being rebuilt, people daring to hope again. Damien Holt sat in a federal prison cell, his trial pending, his name now synonymous with betrayal. Blackwater had become a curse word, spat with contempt in political debates and newspaper headlines. And Selene Carrington? She was no longer the heiress hiding behind her father's shadow. She was the woman who had faced the storm and lived. She paused at the railing, staring out across the river. For the first time in years, the horizon felt open, unchained. I've got it from here, she whispered, her voice carried away by the breeze. Savannah would heal. And so would she.
Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share, so you won't miss our videos. And always remember, we love you. Bye for now.